They mocked me at the wedding, dressed their cruelty in polished suits and fake toasts. My name wasn't on the program, my presence wasn't part of the plan. But when the ambassador said my name, the air shifted. Eyes widened, secrets unraveled, family betrayal, wedding humiliation, and the truth that couldn't stay buried, all in one unforgettable moment. They didn't forget to invite me. They chose not to. That's the difference people miss. Forgetting is clumsy. Erasing is deliberate, calculated. My name was left off the list like it had never existed. Not a misprint, not an oversight, a clean removal. Like I'd died quietly and no one sent flowers. So I showed up anyway. Not in protest. Not for closure. I came because they needed to see that you don't bury a woman like me with silence. You don't exile someone who never needed your permission to exist. The wedding was picture perfect, the kind of staged elegance meant to be posted, praised, admired. Chandeliers, champagne, crisp linen that screamed money and distance. My sister Elena was glowing, not from love, from power, from having won something. What that was, I still don't know. Maybe she thought I'd stay gone forever, that I'd watch from afar, quiet, defeated, forgotten. But I was there, in full uniform. Not as decoration, not as drama. Just a silent presence they couldn't unsee. And they tried. God, they tried. My table wasn't even in the main room. I was seated near the service doors, back left, behind a pillar that blocked the altar. The place card read A. Quinn. No rank, no title, just the legal minimum. The table linen didn't match. No one noticed. Except me. And I noticed everything. My mother floated by once. Her eyes brushed across me, then past me, like I was background noise. Static. Elena didn't make eye contact. Her husband didn't even pretend to know who I was. I sipped still water while the rest toasted with Dom. No one asked why I was alone, because they already knew. I wasn't part of the family today. I was a shadow at their spectacle. That's how they wanted it. But what they didn't realize is shadows only grow longer in the light. And I didn't come to interrupt their story. I came to let it fall apart all on its own. I watched them laugh, pose. Lieutenant. I watched the crowd applaud the version of my family they sold like a luxury brand. And I didn't flinch. Because when your name has been erased from the record, there's only one thing left to do. Make them remember it. Not with noise, not with tears, with something sharper, colder, permanent. I didn't wear the uniform to prove a point. I wore it because it still fits, because it still means something, because when they stripped away everything else, my seat, my name, my history, this was the one thing they couldn't rewrite. I've walked through war zones quieter than that ballroom. And yet, sitting there with my back straight and my hands still, I've never felt such an obvious attempt to diminish a human being. That's the part that sticks with you. Not the volume of the rejection, the precision of it. They wanted me invisible. Instead, I became unforgettable, because when you're forced to the edge of the room, you get the best view of what needs to fall. And it was already cracking. All I had to do was wait. He hadn't spoken yet, but I could feel his eyes. The one man in that entire room who knew the truth, who owed me nothing, and who, in a moment no one would forget, would stand up and change everything. I stood near the back of the ballroom, half shadowed by a marble pillar, watching them toast a future built on lies. The laughter didn't quite reach the ceiling, not like it used to when he was alive. My grandfather's name passed around like currency, their smiles too bright, their voices tight at the edges. They raised glasses to legacy, to family, to everything he stood for. But they never once mentioned the debt, not the one in dollars, but the one in dignity, the one they owed me. Because when he was dying, gasping between morphine-laced dreams and fleeting moments of clarity, I was the one who sat beside him. I was the one who lifted the oxygen mask and listened. Really listened. To the secrets, to the regrets, to the names he whispered when he thought no one would hear. He couldn't speak loud, but he spoke clear enough. Especially when he looked me in the eyes, gripped my wrist with more strength than I thought he still had, and said, "Don't let them rewrite what I built. Don't let them steal your name to protect theirs." That moment wasn't in any eulogy. It wasn't in the slideshow playing above the cake table. And no one here seemed to remember the months he begged for someone to sit with him while they were all too busy planning galas and booking photographers. They didn't bring him soup. They didn't clean the blood from his chin when he coughed too hard. They weren't there when he cried over the son who disappointed him or the daughter who betrayed him. But I was. And still, when he died, they handed me a folded flag like that was supposed to cover the silence they wrapped around my name. They inherited the headlines. I inherited the burden. But what they didn't know, what they didn't count on, was that he left something else. A document. Handwritten. Dated. Hidden where only I would find it. In a book about war strategies, of course. Classic him. It wasn't a will, it was a correction. A record of intention. A transfer of truth. The debt no one mentioned. He paid it. Quietly. With that letter. And once I had it, the question was never if I would use it. It was when. I walked past their clinking glasses, past their champagne smiles, holding a truth they buried long ago and never expected to dig itself free. The irony? They thought this wedding would bury me. But all it did was set the stage. Because the one man in that room with the power to flip the narrative wasn't wearing a tuxedo. He wore a pin, a title. And he remembered a promise made overseas, in a place where honor still meant something. And when his eyes met mine across the room, he didn't look away. He stood. And suddenly, silence didn't feel like absence. It felt like recognition. The toast still echoed in the background when the ambassador started walking toward me. He didn't rush. He didn't blink. And when he opened his mouth, the entire room turned to listen. They had choreographed every detail down to the breath, as if pretending I never existed would erase the weight of my presence, like removing my name from a seating chart could unwrite the years I bled beside their legacy. I watched the performance unfold from the edge of the room, where the lighting faded just enough to blur the lines between invitation and exile. Her dress shimmered like deceit polished to perfection, a designer lie clinging to her skin while she floated between guests, as if grief had never touched her. His smile was mechanical, rehearsed, jaw clenched just enough to look noble in photos. Toasts were raised with careful cadence, stories edited mid-sentence to carve me out. I was the missing character everyone had agreed not to mention, and they were so proud of how seamless the silence sounded. Not a single slip, not a glance out of place, not one relative with enough spine to acknowledge the empty seat at the table with the scratched-out nameplate. I could hear my grandfather in my head, the way he used to talk about how legacy wasn't what you inherited, but what you protected. He warned me they'd try to make it look like I disappeared by choice, that they'd smile for cameras while slicing me out of the story frame by frame, but he didn't warn me how good they'd be at it, the way they laughed, perfectly timed, never too loud, the way she leaned in close when the cameras clicked, her eyes softening just enough to pass for sincerity. Watching them made my chest feel like stone, not heavy from heartbreak, but from calculation. I wasn't hurt. I was documenting. I stood still while they erased me, line by elegant line, and I let them believe they had succeeded. That's what made it powerful. That's what made it dangerous. Because they didn't know the performance was being recorded. Not just by memory, but by something much sharper. something signed, something witnessed, something they could neither predict nor prepare for. I hadn't come to fight. I came to watch them overplay their hand, to study their weakness in high definition. And as they raised another glass, I tilted my head just enough to meet his eyes again across the room, the ambassador. He hadn't moved since we last locked eyes. But I knew what was coming. He did too. Because I wasn't just the daughter they tried to erase. I was the one person who remembered the truth they'd built this entire lie to silence. The room may have been full of applause, but the next sound that would echo wasn't in the script. It would come from the one voice they couldn't control, and the name they swore would never be spoken. The moment the ambassador stood, the air snapped like glass beneath a hairline fracture, silent but irreversible. The sound of his chair scraping against the polished floor seemed louder than the string quartet. Every fork paused mid-air, conversations stopped mid-laugh, and every set of eyes followed his slow, deliberate steps. It wasn't just the act of standing that unsettled them, it was who he was standing for. My name hadn't been uttered all night. Not by the family, not by the officiant, not even in passing. It had been scrubbed, like a stain too stubborn for their curated perfection. But when he turned toward me, nodding once before opening his mouth, I knew the erasure was about to end. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The weight of his words landed like a gavel, sharp and final. "Isabella Dorsey," he said, with the calm clarity of someone who's seen too much war to flinch at a battlefield dressed in tuxedos. The room couldn't breathe. My father shifted first, eyes darting like a man trying to locate the nearest exit without standing. My sister clutched her champagne glass so tight her knuckles turned bone white. And my stepmother, always so composed, always a beat ahead, fumbled her smile like it was melting. My name echoed, not just through the ballroom, but through every lie they'd polished into truth. I didn't move, didn't smile. I just held his gaze and let the silence bloom. The ambassador kept speaking, and with each word, the floor tilted under them. He told them what I had done, where I had been, what had been entrusted to me, not as a favor, not as charity, but as recognition. Proof that while they performed loyalty in public, I had lived it in private. They'd built this evening like a fortress, guarded by reputation and power. But one sentence cracked it open. "She was the last one your father trusted." That was the strike. That was the oxygen pulled from the room. Faces drained, mouths parted without sound. No one could reach for a toast now, because truth had just walked in wearing medals they tried to pretend didn't exist. The ambassador reached into his inner coat pocket and unfolded a single sheet. No fanfare, no theatrics, just one page, thick and cream-colored, with a seal they all recognized. He read the first line, and I swear I heard my father exhale something like a prayer or a curse, because what he read next wasn't just a tribute, it was a transfer. And as the final sentence dropped, all I could think was how poetic it was that in a room so meticulously scripted, the most important line came from the one voice they never thought would speak. There was a moment, just one breath long after the ambassador finished reading, when the entire room existed in a kind of suspended silence, like reality hadn't quite caught up to the sound of my name carved into history. Then came the ripple. Not loud, not explosive, just the soft collapse of illusion, one perfectly manicured lie at a time. I watched them all try to recover. My stepmother reached for her wine glass but missed the stem, her hand trembling just enough to spill a drop on her gown. My father's jaw clenched so tight I could hear his molars grind. My sister looked around the room like she was searching for a door that no longer existed. They'd spent years writing a version of me that was convenient to erase, a ghost in combat boots, a troublemaker, a liability. But now that story was cracking under the weight of something permanent. Not just the letter, not just the ambassador's words, but the evidence, undeniable, recorded, notarized, of who I had always been behind the curtain of their performances. The screens behind the podium flickered on one by one, and the photos appeared, unfiltered and sharp. Not the ones they'd buried, the ones they couldn't access. Me in Kabul. Me briefing generals. Me beside my father's hospital bed the week before he died, when he pressed the original trust amendment into my hands with the final clarity of a man who'd spent too long watching his legacy rot from the inside. That image, the one of him holding my hand, was the one that silenced even the last whispers. Because in that frame, you could see the truth, not the drama, not the staged grief, just two people bound by something real. They couldn't scrub that. They couldn't spin it. And they knew it. I didn't need to say a word. Their silence said enough. The ambassador handed me the envelope, nodded once, and left without waiting for applause. That's how power moves when it's real. Quietly, precisely, without asking for permission. I turned then, walked past the guests who couldn't meet my eyes, past the woman who once told me I was a disgrace, past the man who told me I'd never be more than a mistake in a uniform. And when I stepped outside into the cold, clean air, I realized something they never would. Winning isn't about proving them wrong in public. It's about knowing they'll wake up every day with the memory of this night and the knowledge that the story they tried to erase now owns them. Because no matter what they say, no matter how many headlines they try to spin, there's a line carved into history they can't unwrite. And it ends with my name. And just like that, I walked away. Not just from a wedding that never had room for me, but from the version of me they tried to bury, the woman who was erased, dismissed, forgotten, stood taller than the lies could reach. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need revenge painted in fire. All I needed was the truth to walk in beside me, unshakable, undeniable. That night, in the silence that followed my name, I felt something settle inside me. Not rage, not even pride. Just peace, the kind that only comes when you've survived being rewritten and still kept your original story intact. Let them keep their guest list, their curated speeches, their glassy-eyed photographs. I left with something they'll never own again: the narrative, the legacy, the name they tried to burn, now rising higher than they ever expected. And while they sip champagne and pretend none of it happened, I'll be building what comes next. Quietly, powerfully, on foundations that can't be edited, silenced, or bought. Because the truth is this: you don't have to shout to reclaim your life. You don't have to fight loud battles to win. Sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is show up, uninvited, unshaken, and unbothered, and let the truth speak for you. If there's a lesson here, it's that power doesn't always wear a crown or carry a mic. Sometimes it wears scars. Sometimes it walks in after the ceremony ends. And sometimes it's you, realizing that you never needed their approval to begin with. You just needed the courage to keep showing up as the person they underestimated. So tell me, have you ever had to reclaim your story when others tried to write you out? Share your experience in the comments. Your words could be the light someone else needs. And if stories like this resonate with you, if they remind you of your own quiet strength, then hit subscribe. Let's keep building a space where truth rises, where voices matter, and where power doesn't ask permission to be heard. One click brings more truth. One click brings more power. One click makes more voices heard. Thanks for hearing what most chose to ignore. The truth needed someone to witness it, and that someone was you.